Well, good morning, everyone. Here it is, a nice Monday morning. We had some strange weather here yesterday, but I think it's all cleared up for today. I wanted to do a special edition of This Is Your Life for Mad Mike Hughes. You may have heard that Saturday he launched himself in a rocket, steam powered. It used to be his thing, and it crashed and he was killed. It's tragic to hear the death of anyone. Just recently, we heard about Kirk Douglas dying at 102 years old. He lived a long life, and people were celebrating his death, commemoration for great accomplishments. And yet, still, at 102 years old, it was tragic to hear about his death. It's so much more tragic to hear about someone dying a needless death, preventable with proper education and careful preparation. This was the case for Mike Hughes. He was a self-proclaimed daredevil, and again, like I said, he built a steam-powered rocket that he wanted to launch himself to the edge of the atmosphere, 62 miles up. And he did have experience in making dangerous jumps, building daredevil type equipment, sort of like Evel Knievel used to do. And even with that, building this rocket, he was lacking in many things that could have mitigated his death. How tragic this was. Still, we must try to learn from this terrible accident and not just pick up where he left off and try to repeat his mistakes. Mad Mike was a staunch flat earther. I've heard some different stories about that lately, but I do believe he was a staunch flat earther. It was written all over his rocket, and I just believe that's where he came from. And these flat earthers teach things that are not correct, and because of that, I believe it caused his death. And here are some things that I think are important. First teaching is that school education is indoctrination, and they're very much against school education. I know for a fact that their leadership, the primary people that we see all the time, have really nothing beyond high school. If they have taken college, it's certainly not science related, engineering related. Some of them, things like dance, critical thinking, things that are definitely not science related. And in order for these leaders to deal with this deficit of their lack of education, they teach followers that science education is not necessary. Anybody can do a scientific experiment, engineering, all this stuff, you know, they just kind of poo-poo the education and expect that they can uh, do the science without the education or the experience. Uh, and this is just not true. You most definitely have to have the science. If anything, it's for the scientific mindset, understanding what it is to approach an experiment, to put yourself in a means of thinking and looking at an experiment and what could go wrong and where you might have problems. Secondly, these flat earth leadership teach that the scientific method uh, is some sort of witch's magic spell that makes an experiment work. They wave their wand like Harry Potter and somehow, poof, their experiment uh, makes a real result. Just last week, seriously, just this last week, I heard Bob Nodell say the scientific method was just not important, was not necessary for most experiments. Only, large experiments would you do the scientific method, and that for sure is not correct. I can attest, I can guarantee you that this scientific method can help with anything that you do. If you want to bake a cake, doing the scientific method will help you to get everything and do it right and make sure that you do it the same way every time. It's kind of nice if you bake a cake and it turns out the same way the last one did. And that's what scientists call repeatable, right? So, saying that you don't need the scientific method, or I know some other flat earthers that try to do an experiment and they start off with the scientific method and then they drift away and skip half the steps, and this method, these steps, they leave those out and then their experiment turns out to be a bust. Thirdly, they think of a conclusion, and hang on here. They think of a conclusion, and then once they know the conclusion, they go back and make assumptions and make their hypothesis and come up with an experiment that's going to lead to that conclusion. That just doesn't work. It doesn't produce a valid experiment, and most of you should know that by now. I don't know how many times, especially from flat earthers, you hear this cognitive bias, and that's cognitive bias means that you're biased toward your result. You know what the result is that you want, so that's called cognitive bias. And then lastly, my last thoughts are that with Dunning-Kruger, Dunning-Kruger means that you think more of yourself than you ought to, more of your abilities than should be available. And so what you do is you think, oh, I can't do anything that's wrong because I know exactly how to do all this stuff. And they think that they don't need assistance or, you know, suggestions. They can do it themselves with their own limited education and understanding. They say they can debunk all these past geniuses that have made advancements to science. Einstein, Hawking, Brian Cox, Michio Kaku, and so forth. No one is exempt. I've heard these ridiculous people trying to debunk AB Science, Dr. Bob, and Professor Dave explains. They keep saying that, oh, these guys don't know what they're talking about, and let me show them the right way. And you're just going to get themselves in a mess. I can guarantee that. So, for a scientist or engineer, the most education that you can get, the better. So, get yourself educated. Even if you don't go for the degree or the PhD, whatever, at least try to take some classes and learn something and get yourself accustomed to that mindset. It's only going to help what you're trying to accomplish. I once heard someone say, this was a long time ago, I heard someone say that students or people that come out of high school, they're so excited to get out into the real world and to make their mark on the world. But you really need to get into that college experience, and it's certainly not indoctrination. If you get in the right courses, you're going to be doing hands-on with someone watching you and explaining how you do these steps and how you proceed with these experiments. So it's whether you approach your problems, whether it's math, science, engineering, building rockets like Mad Mike, building satellites or space stations, whatever. So just as important as these experimental results are, so is the preparation and testing. If you look at any of these big technology corporations, you will find that they test, and retest every little piece of their experiments before they put it all together into one thing. And so Mad Mike should have started out calculating how much force he needed. Is that steam engine going to provide the push that he needs to overcome gravity and lift his rocket to the height he needed to go? Next, he should have tested and repeated each subsystem. By that I mean test the engines, make sure the engines work. Do they work every time? Do they not work every time? Do they give you the same output every time. This is, again, what scientists would call repeatable. Um, those failures and those successes teach us things every time. No matter whether it's a success or a failure, you learn something about your experiment. As an undergraduate, I remember one time I was required to work with this hydrofluoric acid for one project. And when I started this project, you know, they tell you a few things: put on gloves, do your project in this hood, and all this stuff. And I was doing that, but I didn't know why. And this graduate student came by and explained to me that hydrofluoric acid, when you get it on you, on your skin, that it doesn't burn like sulfuric acid or something, but it soaks through your skin and eats away at your bones. So it's a very good reason why you should take these safety precautions. And so thank goodness I didn't have to learn that by myself. I could benefit from the experience of someone that had already done that. And so that is another thing about science that maybe flat earthers could benefit from, is that you don't start from scratch and throw out everything that has been done before. You have to build on all of those things that have been done before. Mad Mike should have had mitigations for safety. Boy, safety is the biggest thing. If he's going to climb in that rocket himself, he should have had some kind of backups. You know, he should have prepared himself, and, you know, what if this part fails, or what if that part fails, or so that he could protect himself from this kind of tragedy. I remember I just saw in the news this weekend about a race car driver that his car hit the wall at 200 miles an hour, and he walked away with just some minor injuries. They had benefited from previous crashes so that they knew how to keep their driver safe, and that's something that Mad Mike didn't do. And you know, there could have been a body parachute like skydivers use, or some kind of barriers, or some kind of harness, or whatever, like race car drivers use. Even being a trained stuntman, he should have known that you know, even in these stunts, they make it very sure that they've been careful to get all of this done. Last, I want you to remember that just recently here we had a video that explained what goes up must come down, that when you leave the ground at a certain velocity and acceleration, that as you go over your the top of your curve and come back down. When you hit the ground, you're going at the same exact velocity and acceleration that you were when you started. We need to remember these things because it could be something that you need. It's really sad and tragic to hear about his death, and more so, it's sad that his friends, his co-flat earthers, seem to already be distancing themselves from his death. I just don't understand how people that knew him and were friends with him could all of a sudden say it was a conspiracy. He really wasn't in the rocket. They're hiding him. They're hiding that fact. They didn't want him going up and finding out the Earth's flat. So I just don't understand that mindset that you can't even grieve your tragic losses like this. So I hope that what you've learned from this little talk I'm giving you is to prepare, educate yourself, safety, and learn from those who've gone before. Learn from, mistakes or successes of those that have gone before. And as I close this, I hope that you will take a moment of silence to remember Mad Mike Hughes and his efforts at furthering flat earth science. So that's all I had for today. I hope you'll stick with me this week. We got some interesting stuff coming.